Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. My name's Jack McCullough, and we have a great CFO with one of the coolest companies I've come across. So let's rock. Folks, our guest today is Sean Brecker. Sean is the CFO of Oura. Sean, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Thanks so much, Jack. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. And when your team reached out about doing this, I was really excited because wearing one of your rings is a real badge of honor. And, you know, I know they're huge in Silicon Valley. It's like you walk around there and you feel like an outcast if you're not wearing one almost. So, which is quite a thing. But for those who, perhaps aren't familiar, you want to give the 10,000-foot view of your company?
Yeah, sure. So I work for a company called Oura. The company is actually a Finnish company, although most of our C-suite is in the United States and specifically in the Bay Area. I'm the kind of one outlier based in Los Angeles, but I spend a lot of time in the Bay Area. And we make a product that is called the Oura Ring. And what it is it's a smart ring. So it's a wearable device that has a number of sensors, and just as importantly, a number of proprietary software algorithms that can measure all kinds of insights about your health. So, where we got started was really around sleep. Since then, we've made significant strides around, heart health, around women's health, around fitness, movement, et cetera. So it's a ring that is a form of wearable, but delivers a tremendous amount of insights via an app on the smartphone.
Yeah, the technology is amazing. It's not going to be too long before people are going to be living to 150 years old, largely because of a high-tech type of innovation. So that's great. And we'll get into a lot of some of the challenges and exciting things going on there. But I wanted to first talk a little about you. And one thing that jumped out at me, you're the first guest I've had so far. You were born in the United States and went to high school in England, London, I believe. And I'm curious what that was like.
Yeah, so I was actually I was born in Pakistan, of all places.
Oh, my bad.
And then
I
moved, no, it's all good. And then I moved to London at the age of 2. So I am an American citizen. I only hold one passport, which is the American passport. And I spent my childhood really from 2 until 18 in the UK. In the early parts of my childhood, I went to English schools. And so I sounded fully English. And then for a number of reasons, in the 7th grade, my parents decided to move me to a school that is called the American School in London. So it's not particularly imaginatively named, but it is as if you picked up an American K through 12 school and you dropped it in the heart of London. So at that time, mostly American kids, although today it is much more of an international school, mostly an American faculty teaching an American curriculum. Most of the kids went on to go to college in the United States. And so it was an incredible experience being at what we call ASL. And, my American accents, my English accent sort of slowly started to get chipped away. And I became, pretty Americanized in those formative years and kind of 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. But yeah, I spent my whole childhood in London.
Yeah, well, you had me fooled. I thought for sure that you were a lifetime American, but can you still do the English accent?
I think if you put a cocktail or 2 in me, it might come back. Or sometimes, I still consider London home. Most of my family is still there. So sometimes when I'm back, if I'm in a taxi and I'm talking to the cabbie, the twang might come back a little bit. But yeah, it's that place is really home for me.
Yeah, no, the reason I know a guy, he thinks Americans are nicer to English people than they are to other Americans. And he actually, he's a Brit, and he's beginning to lose the accent, but he's sort of fighting to keep it because he thinks it's more effective in sales. My Uncle Pat moved from Ireland to the United States in 1929. He died in 1992. And he had the thickest accent you've ever heard. He never lost a trace of his accent. So
wow, that's awesome.
he used to say, "Give me a chance. I've only been here 60 years." So,
That's funny.
but anyway, so you went to school in London, and what attracted you to a career in finance and business in general?
Yeah, so the American school, the families at the American school were mostly expat families. And there were a lot of, so the families there, the parents typically worked in a lot of folks in, investment banks or sort of large multinational banks, some, oil companies, some in politics, for instance, the ambassador's kid, went to our school. But I was surrounded by a lot of friends whose parents were in banking. And so I started to have exposure to finance and specifically the capital markets at a, pretty young age. And I found it pretty fascinating. I always gravitated towards math. Math was always my favorite subject. I had the most sensational math teacher at the American school who I was just reunited with a couple of years ago. I went back to actually give the commencement address in my high school
Oh, wow.
2 summers ago, and I got reunited with Suzanne Brooks. Shout out to Miss Brooks, my math teacher back then. And math obviously plays a pretty pivotal role in the world of finance. And so I just sort of naturally had a draw towards finance. My parents were not in finance at all. They were in the apparel manufacturing business, can be sort of farther from the world of global finance, but I just found it really fascinating, and starting to become a student of the markets and understand how the markets worked. I thought it was really exciting, and so I just sort of very naturally had a pull towards that world.
Yeah, and you in fact started your career in investment banking, right?
That's right. So I started, I studied math. I moved in 1997. I moved, to the United States to attend college. Sorry, in 1993. I graduated college in 97. So in 97, I took a role at JP Morgan. This is before the Chase merger. So this is, the old JP Morgan in New York, 60 Wall Street. Very exciting, to start my career literally on Wall Street for a, very famous, global bank. And I started my career on the market side. And I really spent the majority of my time in investment banking on the market side, and specifically working as a trader. So I did that for a few years, and then went back to business school. And then after business school, I continued my career as a trader, but this time trading derivatives, and specifically in the world of fixed income. I went to work for Lehman Brothers in London after graduating from business school in 2003. Did that for a few years. My boss then tapped me on the shoulder one day on the trading floor and said, "Hey, you understand derivatives well. We're building a commodities franchise. We've hired a bunch of folks that know how to move physical commodities around the world, but we're lacking some expertise in derivatives. Do you want to start up a derivatives franchise in commodities?" So I did that. We recruited a gentleman out of Goldman Sachs who was my partner, and the two of us basically co-founded this derivatives desk. And then a year later, he tapped me on the shoulder again and said, "You guys have done an awesome job. Someone needs to go replicate it in Asia. Why don't you move to Singapore and go build it out in Singapore?" So
Nice.
that's what I did. I ended up spending 7 years in Singapore. Of course, Lehman Brothers sadly went on to bankruptcy, but I stayed in Singapore working for other large investment banks like Citigroup. And did that until 2014.
Yeah, so you're probably not even 35 at this point in time, or maybe about 35.
About to turn 49. So
okay. No, I meant when all of these stories were.
Oh, at that time,
yeah.
yes.
So yeah,
that's right.
And so you've had a hell of a run at a relatively young point in your career.
That's
So,
right.
Yeah, good for
Yeah.
you. And by the way,
did.
you went to Wesleyan and you studied mathematics and economics.
That's
And
correct. Yes.
As a New England Patriots fan, that's Bill Belichick's background. So did you ever consider going into NFL coaching? So
I didn't, but you're right. Bill Belichick is one of the sort of most famous alums at Wesleyan, and which is funny because Wesleyan is not known for being a big football school. It's Division III NESCAC football powerhouse. So, but yeah, I would have loved to have gone into football coaching, but sadly, growing up in England, we didn't have a ton of exposure. The football we were exposed to was the one with the round ball that you kick with your feet, not the one that not the pigskin that you throw.
Yeah, I think yours is that version is probably the real football. There's very little kicking in American football, so
That's right.
interesting, but cool. But so great background, learned a lot, some great stuff, and then you joined, I believe, straight out of investment banking. Your first job was Headspace. Is
Yes,
okay,
that's right.
and so
So
you
good.
had a great run there, about a decade. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, so I was recruited, well, basically in 2014, when I left investment banking, my wife and I also left Singapore. At that point, we had three young children. All three of our kids were born in Singapore. We wanted to be closer to our families in the US, and we decided to pick up and move to California. And my plan was to take a year off and to try and figure out what to do next. There wasn't a ton of commodity trading, opportunities in California, and it felt to me like it was time to, try something different, but I wasn't quite sure what that was going to be. About a month into that year off, I ended up being recruited to Headspace by one of its founders. That gentleman, a fantastic guy named Rich Pearson, was an old friend of mine when I was living in London right out of business school. And he and his co-founder, two Brits, had founded this company, Headspace, in London. They moved the company to the United States, and specifically to Los Angeles, in 2013. And they were just getting going. They had launched effectively a meditation app. It was a subscription offering that would guide folks on how to meditate. It was pretty nascent. They hadn't raised any capital. They had, at the time, maybe 20,000 subscribers, and they'd effectively just bootstrapped it. And Rich's background was in advertising, and his co-founder, Andy, was a former Tibetan Buddhist monk. So not your classic kind of startup duo.
Not at all. A lot of,
not
don't think
your
of Tibetan
typical
monks as
founding
being
story.
entrepreneurial. So
Yeah, this is not two, computer science grads from Stanford in the proverbial Silicon Valley garage. It was sort of, nothing could be farther from the case. And Rich, reached out to me and said, we had sort of lost touch when I moved to Singapore. Rich reached out to me and said, hey, I saw that you've moved to LA. I've also moved to LA. I'd love to get together and reconnect and tell you a little bit about what I'm working on. And I'd heard through the grapevine that they were doing something in meditation. And when he explained the concept to me, honestly, I thought, oh, you've lost your mind. You had this amazing job in advertising, and that you've left to start up this niche meditation app. And how big could that be? How many people meditate and so on. So I had all the, what's so ironic is that I think I had all the sort of stereotypes around meditation that we at Headspace worked so hard to break down over the decade that I was there. And long story short, Rich and Andy asked me to come on board and just help. And at the time, it was very unstructured. I was the quote unquote numbers guy. The running joke was I was the only person that had a license to Microsoft Excel. No one else, knew how to use Excel. And I was just a sort of catch-all numbers guy. And in pretty short order, we started to get more structured as we thought about raising capital. And Rich and Andy would say to me, oh, well, should we raise capital, and how does that work, and so on and so forth. And I would say, look, I'm a first-time operator. I don't really know, but I'm willing to put one foot in front of the other and go figure it out. And that was basically what we did for, the better part of a decade. So I had a number of different roles there. I was CEO for a few years. I was, CFO for many years. And even when wearing the CFO hat, I, besides sort of traditional roles of finance, accounting, corp dev, I also had things like HR and growth and science. And when we launched a B2B business, I was in charge of that for a short period. Corporate IT, risk, like I wore a number of different hats, but yeah, ended up spending 10 years there. We went on to raise about $350 million. We got the business to about a $3 billion enterprise value. And it was just an incredible privilege working there. And honestly, just, the journey of a lifetime.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like you hear actors say they got a great role at such a young age, like the young guy from Breaking Bad, Jesse.
Right.
He's 26. He'll never have a better role, no matter how long he acts, right? You kind of are like that, right? I mean, the odds of replicating that are pretty skim. But so, but Sean, you mentioned you have 3 children.
That's right.
So do you like dad jokes? Because you made me think of one.
I mean,
Okay.
it's funny you mentioned that because I was pretty famous at Headspace for having just the most cringy dad jokes. So hit me, Jack. I'm all
Okay,
about the dad jokes.
this one would have fit in well at Headspace. I needed a hobby, so I decided to take up meditation. It beat sitting around doing nothing.
That's perfect.
Yeah, it's too bad you didn't know it at the time, huh? So, but
Yeah, I'm happy to add that to my repertoire.
there you go. So beautiful. So anyway, great learning opportunity. Been a CEO, been a CFO, rapid growth, raised a lot of money. You get an opportunity to jump to Oura. Tell me a little about that transition. Might be obvious why you left to join Oura, but tell me a little about the decision-making process and how the opportunity came about.
Yeah, I mean, sort of similar to Headspace, it just happened very organically. So Tom Hale, who's the CEO at Oura, is someone that I had known not particularly well, but we'd met a few times. He was previously the president at a company called SurveyMonkey. Well, I guess they renamed it to Momentive, and the CEO of SurveyMonkey / Momentive, Xander Lurie, is a good friend of mine. So Xander connected me to Tom a few years ago. As we were building out a B2B franchise at Headspace, we leaned on Tom a couple of times just to, he has such immense knowledge around all things, software, that he was a great, resource. So I had met him a couple of times, and then I ended up sitting next to him at a dinner that was hosted by one of our investors. I think this was the fall of 2022. And so I think it was the spring or maybe the summer of 23, he reached out to me just to say, hey, I'm looking for a CFO and I'd love to pick your brain around sort of how I should be thinking about it. And we had just a very organic conversation. Now, at this point, I'd already been a huge fan of Oura. I'd been wearing the Oura ring for a couple of years at that point, when this latest generation that we're on, what we call Generation 3, when that first came out, is when I first started wearing Oura. So I was a huge fan of the product. It was the only wearable that had kind of stuck with me. And I think that was a combination of the level of insights that it gives you, plus the gentleness, the kind of tone. It's not super judgy. If you don't sleep well, or if you skip a day working out, it's not sort of making you feel terrible about yourself. And so that resonated with me, and so the product really stuck with me. And so it was a very organic process, with Tom sort of first reaching out and talking to me about what he was thinking about in the CFO role. And then, we set up some time to have a follow-up conversation just to really understand the business and sort of where was it heading directionally, what was the future, vision, what was the strategy of the company. Then I got to understand the actual numbers of the business, like look under the hood of the sort of financial profile of the business, which is just, phenomenal. And then I think the icing on the cake was just meeting the team. I think I'd met 15 or 20 folks as part of the interview process, and everyone was just world class. And it was a team that I was very excited about the potential of working with. And for me, it really represented a learning opportunity. I had never been in a hardware business. In fact, I'd never really been an operator that had sort of physical components where one had to think about supply chain and inventory, and that just the puzzle of figuring all of that stuff out just seemed pretty exciting to me. So yeah, I took the plunge, and I joined Oura at the beginning of October. So I'm just coming up on wrapping up 4 months. So still pretty new at the company.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I planned on asking you about the relationship with Tom, and because if you do some research, it seems that the most critical relationship in the C-suite is often between the president and the CFO. And they don't have to hang out on the weekends or golf together or anything like that, but business-wise, it needs to be a really supportive type of relationship. And there's the expression, the emperor has no clothes. If that's the case, it often falls to the CFO to point that out. So, but what's your relationship with Tom so far?
It's great. I mean, I think we work really well together. I have the utmost of respect, for him. He's an incredibly smart, sharp guy. I mean, I feel like I'm like a sponge. I'm like constantly taking knowledge from him. He's been in the CEO role at Oura for about 18 months, maybe a little over 18 months. And I think one of the things that I found so impressive is just how quickly he has ramped his knowledge and expertise around all things related to health, all things related to hardware. He can speak so eloquently about the physiology of what's going on, is when we're taking, measurements on the finger as an example. And so I've learned a ton from him. I think the relationship that we have, I like to view myself as, a strategic advisor to the CEO and to other members of the senior leadership team, really around capital allocation decisions. Like, I think that is to some degree at the core of what we do. Like, there is an infinite world of opportunities for us to invest in, especially when we're, at this growth stage. But you don't always have the capital to invest in all things. And even if you did, the operational complexity with running 100 initiatives at the same time could sink a company. And so I like to take a sort of put back on, from my prior career, my sort of capital allocator hat to, help folks on the senior leadership team think through these capital allocation decisions. And how do we approach that through risk-adjusted lenses? How do we kind of start with the right size bet and then really measure signal to see whether that bet is working or not before we decide whether we're going to put more chips on the table or if we're going to take our chips off the table. And so that's the way I like to work. And I think thus far, that has resonated with the Oura team.
Makes sense. And, there's been probably too many things written about the first 90 days. It's
Right.
on cliche, perhaps. In fact, I myself have written 2 such articles in my life, but it's something that's really talked about. And, one of the things a lot of people tell me, and it's hard for CFOs, because I'm going to guess, Sean, you're very action oriented. You just want to start doing stuff, right? But step back, resist the temptation to start doing stuff and learn the business, build alliances. What have your first 90 days been like?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think the one thing that really served me well at Headspace, being a first-time operator, and a startup that is trying to build a mental health business couldn't be more different than a commodity derivatives trading operation in Singapore. And so I was forced to have the humility at Headspace to know what I didn't know, but then to have the determination to just be kind of dogged about figuring it out. And I think that has really served me well over the last decade at Headspace. Well, I had to bring a similar mindset at Oura. I mean, I don't know about hardware. I don't have experience in hardware. I don't know about governance and compliance in Finland, which is very important to this company, given it's a Finnish parent company. And so I was almost forced to do exactly what you just said, Jack, which is sort of step back and take stock and assess. And so I saw a fantastic graphic that you had put together about the first 90 days of sort of what is the role of the CFO in the first 90 days. And I thought it was sort of bang on the money.
Borderline genius, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Not even borderline, just absolute genius. I think the thing, and as I was looking at it, I was like, oh yeah, I did that and that and that. And, I sort of checked a lot of those boxes, but I think the things that I had to do sort of above and beyond that were really come up the curve around Finnish compliance and Finnish accounting standards, which are, there's some material differences versus US GAAP as an example. And then I think there was and this one's maybe a bit more specific to Oura, but I think there was a little bit of a kind of storytelling job to do to educate the company about the business, which is interesting because I saw that at Headspace too. When we're in the world of finance and even across sort of my finance team, everyone is just so fluent in the numbers of the business. And you forget that we have about 550 people at Oura, not everyone is the same way. And so there's a real storytelling job to be done around how you communicate the financial story of the business. And so sort of coming up with that narrative and figuring out the right way to communicate that was also pretty important in the first 90 days.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, one thing that jumps out, Sean, at me is that the 2 companies that you've worked for since investment banking are in sort of the healthcare and the wellness space. And was that serendipitous, or was this a passion of yours, or maybe it's become a passion because of where you work?
Yeah, I would say moving to Headspace, it was serendipity because it was sort of right place, right time. I got recruited by Rich, who I just happened to know. Working at Headspace, I came to really love health and wellness. So it's no coincidence that as I left Headspace and took a job at Oura, it is in a kind of similar role. I think for me, my dad, who passed away a couple of years ago, or actually right before COVID 2020, he had a series of non-fatal heart attacks. I think he had 4 heart attacks beginning when he was about my age. I'm in my late 40s. His first heart attack was, I remember I was probably 8 or 9 years old. So around the same age, he must have been sort of 48, 49. And I remember how scary that was to me that, I could have lost him at that time. He ended up having a number of other heart attacks, but that's not ultimately what killed him. But I think that was the first sort of wake up call for me around the importance of health and wellness. I think the second kind of major contributor to me has been my wife, who is a little bit of a kind of wellness freak. I mean, really, really takes care of her body. I think that started with her being a pretty elite athlete at a young age. So she was a championship, figure skater. Has an identical twin who was also a, very talented figure skater. And so I think from an early age, she really took care of her body and really sort of treated it well. And I'm happy to see that DNA has kind of been passed on to my kids. I mean, I have 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter. They're all great athletes. My daughter's not particularly into sports, but she's a great runner. She's gotten really into dancing. And my 2 boys are just really, really passionate about basketball. Play AAU club basketball,
Oh
play
my.
on their school team, and also play in a recreational league. So it's great to see these kids. I mean, of course they love, going to Shake Shack and having a milkshake, but they really do think about, what they're eating, and they think about working out. And, my son the other night, he's almost 15. He just was walking out the door at 7 p.m. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm just going to go on a run. I'll be back in 30 minutes. And I would have never have done
Like
that,
that's
when I
normal,
was
huh?
a kid.
Sure.
So I'm pleased to see that, and like I said, I credit my wife on this, but I'm pleased to see that we're raising a household of kids that care about health and wellness in the same way that I do.
Yeah, it's with Jess, who's the production manager. It's an ongoing joke that somehow every guest we have is a better athlete than I am. So, but by the way, does your wife know that you refer to her as a freak?
No, but I'm hoping she won't listen to the podcast. So,
We'll edit that part out.
hopefully that'll be our secret.
There you go. So cool. No, that's great that your kids are so active, and you live in LA, which, certainly by reputation is known for a health obsessed culture. Are you finding that
That's
to be the
right.
case? So,
Yes, for sure. I mean, I love LA. We've been here. It's coming up on 10 years now. I think the thing I love the most about LA is just being outdoors. I mean, the opportunities to hike or to get in the water, we're fortunate to live pretty close to the beach, to, a few hours away to have world-class skiing. I mean, the opportunities to be outdoors are what will prevent me, I think, from ever leaving LA. I couldn't value it more, and I like to take advantage of it as much as possible.
yeah, no, I'm a lifetime New Englander. So, it's fairly pleasant today, although I look out the window and there's snow on the roof, but it was like 6 degrees a few days ago. And, that's kind of fun when you're young, but at my age, and I'm about a decade older than you, Sean, it's not that pleasant at all. So, LA certainly, I didn't want to live there necessarily when I was young, but, now that I'm older, and boy, it certainly holds its appeal. So, and it is true. I mean, I just exercise less in the winter, just it's easy to exercise when it's warm out, go for a run or at the beach or whatever it might be. So good for you.
Totally.
Was sports part of you when you were growing up? Did you play any sports in high school or?
I was never a great athlete growing up. I mean, I played tennis and I played soccer, but I played, on the junior varsity team, and I played a bunch of little league sports too. But I was never a great athlete. It was never something that, my dad or my mom, neither of them really were athletes. It's not something that they weren't even sort of really into sports or sports fans. And so there just wasn't a lot of athletics in my household. So like I said, I give all the credit around how my kids turned out to my wife, because she is a stud athlete.
Yeah, good. That's terrific. But you're able to, bring that in. And, there's with me, with my athletic prowess, there's an expression, the older I get, the better I was. You know, by the time I'm
That's
80,
great.
yeah, by the time I'm 80, people are going to think that I was an Olympian level athlete, but a non-existent knee injury is the only thing that prevented me from making the Olympic team with Larry Bird and Michael Jordan. So,
Yeah, the
but
dream team.
one thing I've noticed about you, Sean, which is very admirable, and I got this from your LinkedIn profile, you are on a couple of volunteer boards. And
Yes.
is that something like part of your DNA that you were raised to give back? And can you talk a little about that experience?
Yeah, it was very much a part of, my DNA growing up. I mean, we were encouraged from a young age. There were sort of two things that my parents really instilled in us. I say us, myself and my brother and my sister, which were really a strong work ethic. So, my parents used to always say, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And they would sort of hammer that home repeatedly. And then, the not even necessity, but the fact that sort of giving back is not only the right thing to do, but is, adds sort of fulfillment and purpose, to one's life. And so we did do quite a bit of volunteer work, as a kid and kind of growing up. And so it has been a passion for me. I've been on this board. It's a fantastic organization called ŌURA. In fact, we're about to have our annual board retreat on Friday. It was founded by a gentleman I mentioned earlier, Xander Lurie, who was the CEO of Momentive, the company that actually Tom Hale used to work at.
Okay.
And
That used to be Survey Monkey, Sean, Momentive.
it used to be called SurveyMonkey.
Okay, yeah,
Yes, that's right.
I still use the product. I didn't even pick up on the
It's
fact.
a great product.
Oh
Great
yeah,
product.
they've got to be close to
But
monopoly, I would think. But
yeah, I think there's one major competitor, but yeah, it's definitely a great product. So anyway, Xander founded this nonprofit about 20 years ago called ŌURA. And what we do is we provide arts and athletics programming to chronically sick kids. So the concept is, if a kid is dealing with, God forbid, cancer, and they're in a children's hospital and they're getting treatment, and there's actually oftentimes great resources in the hospital, for beyond just the medical treatment. But when they come home, it may be hard for them to resume normal extracurricular activities. It may be hard for them to play sports or to go to art class, or sometimes they may not even be able to attend school. They may have to be homeschooled because of, the condition that they have. And this can oftentimes affect the siblings too, because the parents are so focused on, taking care of the sick kid. And what ŌURA does is it partners with volunteer coaches to bring this programming typically into the home. And it has just had a transformational effect on the lives of countless kids. So it's been a real privilege to be involved. It's something that we got involved in at Headspace pretty early on, maybe around 2015, 2016, something like that. And then pretty soon thereafter, I was asked by Xander and a couple other board members if I would consider joining the board. So I've been on the board now for 5 or 6 years. It's been just a huge privilege, and I couldn't be more proud of the work that the organization is doing.
well, good for you. That's very admirable. Sean, one of the downfalls of being successful, I guess, is that inevitably people are going to want to, get into the market that you're in and imitate your success. And I know the company is very innovative, but how does it use an innovative culture to really, keep on the cutting edge?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, they say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, right? So I think that, it doesn't surprise us. And indeed, there are starting to be competitors specifically in the smart ring space that are starting to pop up, or benefits from just having an extremely innovative culture. And so we are constantly innovating. We're not resting on our laurels. And so that means not only innovating around the hardware, but innovating around the software and the science too. So said another way, even with a sort of fixed number of sensors, there's still many more things that we can measure, deliver insights into, ways for us to improve people's health, just even, using software. And so we have a huge commitment to science and research. We have a huge commitment to intellectual property. I mean, we have by far the most robust intellectual property portfolio of anyone in the, smart ring space, perhaps even in the wearables space. But we don't rest on our laurels. So we just keep pushing forward, keep innovating, keep shipping more and more insights and more value to our members to enable them to improve their overall health and wellness.
Yeah, that's great. One thing I'd like to ask my guests this, Sean, because I want to make sure that the stereotype of finance people being dull and uninteresting, but is there like a fun fact about you, or maybe just something about you that would surprise people to learn?
I mean, it might be a useless fact, but I have freakishly fast reflexes.
Okay.
So which I put to no good use, except for if I drop something, I will oftentimes catch it before it hits the ground. So the other day, an AirPod fell out of my ear and I just reached down without even looking and I grabbed it before it hit the ground. And this seems to happen to me, I don't know, a couple times a week, because maybe I'm a bit of a klutz, but I'll sort of like drop something and I'll catch it before it hits the ground. So that's a pretty useless talent. I mean, I guess I should have maybe applied it towards being like a Formula One driver or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's a skill that sometimes like stuns, my kids or my wife, and they're like, that's weird how you can do that. So not particularly useful, but I guess that's a fun fact.
That's funny. I'm envisioning this first Spider-Man movie, going back, the one with Tobey Maguire, and Mary Jane, I think, drops her tray. He catches it like that, and even he was surprised by it. He didn't quite understand his powers yet. Maybe you were bitten by a radioactive spider at some point in your
Maybe
youth.
if only I were as cool as Spider-Man, but sadly not.
Yeah, probably not. Not too many like that. Anyway, this has been a lot of fun. I'd like to ask one question of you. You've had a great career, and I'm wondering if there's any advice you could share with the next generation of CFOs.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in meditation, we have this concept of the beginner's mind. And I was forced to have a beginner's mind as I transitioned from a career in investment banking to being an operator. And I would say, just always bring that beginner's mind, which I think practically translates into be intellectually curious, read, listen to podcasts, learn, ask for advice, seek mentors, anything that you can do to improve your craft and to learn, I think you should do. And I think the sort of second tenet there is remain humble, have the humility to know what you don't know, and have the determination to go figure it out. And sounds really simple, but that has really been the playbook that, I've run in the last decade of being an operator.
I think that's fantastic advice. Particularly, I love intellectual curiosity. So, Sean, this has been a lot of fun, and I think some great content
Likewise.
to the listeners. I just want to give you a chance to have the final word.
Well, I just really appreciate being invited on this podcast, Jack. I'm a big fan of your work, and I'm very passionate about startups, about being an operator, about being a CFO. I have been the beneficiary of a lot of help, advice, guidance, shoulders to cry on, et cetera, in the last decade. And so any opportunity to pay it forward is one that I really relish. So I really appreciate you giving me that opportunity today.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.